Hey there guys, we're taking a look at Call of Duty Warzone running on the AMD Ryzen 5 5500U. Now the game is currently running at 1080p with the lowest in-game graphics settings. We are running this at the 15-watt stock TDP, and this is with the 22.7.1 drivers. Now these drivers do come with some improvements, but it's only to OpenGL and DirectX 11, so this running on DirectX 12 really does not benefit from that at all. You can tell by the fact that the performance, at least at these settings, is absolutely abysmal. It is pretty much unplayable because good luck trying to aim at anyone while running at 20 FPS and getting 1% lows that go down into the single digits. All in all, absolutely terrible gaming experience like this. I would not recommend that you try to play like this. But of course, we can try to raise the TDP to see if that improves our overall experience. And you know, the worst part of trying to play these games online while doing the testing is at these settings, you know it's not going to run well and you end up having a pretty bad gaming experience for at least the first few hours of testing. And that's exactly what was going on here. It was really just like not an enjoyable gaming experience in the slightest because those 1% lows were pretty much half of our refresh rate. And I mean, at least they're not in the single digits anymore, but 14 isn't exactly the highest number you can possibly get for a 1% low. And you'll see that the frame times do spike up just from looking around, so it makes aiming so difficult. It's really annoying. In general, super unpleasant gaming experience, and I would be very shocked if you could just consistently win like this. It is a overall very rough gaming experience. Of course, we can try to raise the TDP even more, but at this point I really had very low expectations of the 30-watt TDP since everything was just really not looking great so far. And it was absolutely no surprise that the performance ended up being pretty awful here. I mean, we would get 1% lows that reached the 20 range, but the averages and 1% lows still were just not great for this kind of game, and overall I found it very difficult to try to play like this. It's certainly the best 1080p experience that we've seen so far, but that's not exactly saying much considering how badly this was running before. In general, I would recommend that you just avoid 1080p in this game. It's really just not going to give you a good enough experience to try to get away with playing like this. This is really brutal. Just looking at those frame time charts, you can see how bad it is. But of course, we can always drop the resolution, though that does start to become an annoyance for a game like this, where a lot of the engagements can be at pretty far distances. But you'll see that at 900p with the 15-watt TDP, you can see that really the overall performance still isn't great. 1% lows that are dropping below 20 pretty frequently or just staying at the low 20s, and averages that are just slightly above 30 pretty much means that overall this is a rough gaming experience. For a competitive shooter like this, I really don't know how you would justify playing like this. I'm just not a fan of this level of performance at all, so we're going to have to raise the TDP to try to see if that actually can salvage the overall experience. Now at the 25-watt TDP, we actually do see a boost in performance, though the biggest gains here are in the averages where they're now in the 40 range, but our 1% lows are really just practically identical to where we were at before. So while it is a smoother experience, it is not significantly smoother because the 1% lows are dragging everything down here. So still not a very playable experience, though it is starting to get within a range that some of the more desperate users out there would probably actually end up playing like. Personally, I still wouldn't recommend it for a game like this, but I know that there are a lot of people out there that do actually just end up playing on systems like this with settings like this, and they can be pretty successful in the games. It just takes a lot of practice and a lot of learning, and really you're always going to have at least some disadvantage compared to everyone else. So really overall not an enjoyable experience, but again, up to personal preference. For me personally, still not an enjoyable experience. Really, it took going all the way up to the 30-watt TDP to start to see some actually pretty decent results. 1% lows in the 30 range pretty much means that that is the bare minimum of what is going to be an enjoyable experience, and having averages in the 40 range pretty much means that there isn't at least going to be major deviation in terms of your overall performance. But if you look at those frame time charts, there is still some fluctuation there, and this is really one of those things where this is kind of a bare minimum experience, if you ask me, for a Call of Duty game, because I always associate these with some pretty fast combat, and because of that you pretty much end up in a situation where it's rough to pretty much try to deal with such a low FPS from a franchise that is just so fast paced. So really, we're pumping a lot of power through this system just to get what is barely a playable experience. Still pretty rough, but we can always drop the resolution down even more, though now we're starting to affect the playability by, I would argue, a pretty significant margin. And at 720p with the 15-watt TDP, we actually get performance that is really comparable to 900p at the 30-watt TDP. And of course, we are running at a lower TDP here, so getting the same level of performance is pretty reasonable, though the resolution is low enough now that seeing enemies at a distance is very difficult. And personally, I don't know if I would actually play Warzone like this, but it's really hard to decide because this laptop isn't my main gaming machine. So I have the option to play the game on a better system. I don't know if I would actually stomach it like this. If this was the only system that I had, I think I would realistically just play something else. But we are at least within ranges that might be playable, but the 1% lows are going to take hits here and there, so it's not a perfect experience by any means. And of course, going up to the 25-watt TDP actually ends up netting us some pretty nice averages where we are so close to 60, but the 1% lows are still in the 30 range, though now it's in the high 30s, but it'll still fluctuate and drop down into the low 30s. So in general, the averages will see some bumps, but those 1% lows end up dragging down the whole experience because it really makes those average gains not really that noticeable in terms of the actual gameplay. So this is a pretty playable experience, but it isn't perfect. And again, if you're somebody that's super competitive in this game, it might just not be enough for you. But I think that this is within the range that people might find to be acceptable and will stomach playing like this if you're willing to go with 720p. And in general, the averages being higher here does overall make the experience a little bit better from where we were at before, but still not the most ideal situation for a Call of Duty game. But I understand that it is a pretty heavy game and we are on a budget system where you kind of have to take what you can get from it. Now, when we get up to the 30-watt TDP, we pretty much aren't seeing any real noticeable gains here. We're pretty much getting the same exact numbers that we were getting at the 25-watt TDP. So it's certainly not awful, but it's nothing amazing either. And I would say that overall, it's a reasonable level of performance, but you probably are just better off going with the 25-watt TDP. I mean, if you have the headroom to go all the way up to 30 and not mess with the thermals and your system isn't being so noisy to you, then go right ahead and run it like this because you are at least going to be getting at least some performance boost over the 25-watt TDP, though it's just so immeasurable that I personally would kind of just go for the lower temperatures and lower noise over what is imperceivable levels of performance. So again, if you have the headroom for it, you might as well go for it just because of the fact that it probably means that you're going to prevent yourself from having any issues that might present themselves at the 25-watt TDP, but by not a significant margin at all. And that might just be pure copium because realistically, while playing a couple of games with each setting, I really did not notice any difference. So really, it all just depends on you, what you want to do. In general, I would just say maybe don't play the game on here. I think that dropping down to 720p can be pretty aggressive. For close quarter combat, it's perfectly fine, but anything long range and you just pretty much lose sight of everything. It's kind of ridiculous. In general, I am just not too happy with how this game is performing on here. You can certainly get away with it if you're fine with this level of performance. I mean, this is about as good as it's going to get, and it is actually pretty pleasant to play. It's just the resolution is so low. And I only say that because of the fact that it makes it very difficult to see enemies sometimes at a distance, even on the 15-inch display of this laptop. And really, I can't imagine how the jagged edges are going to end up looking if I hooked this up to the 25-inch 144 hertz display. So overall, it's really up to you on whether or not you actually want to play Warzone like this. I mean, it is reasonable levels of performance at this point, but you are going to see those frame time spikes when you're doing things. It's not going to feel the greatest, but in general, if this is your game, you can at least play it at some settings. And I mean, who knows, maybe if you sink enough time into this, you just become a god at it, and any higher resolution might actually just melt your eyes. But anyways, I hope you guys found this look at Call of Duty Warzone on this chip. This is the most thorough look that I've done on it because I've only done smaller tests with just a few specific settings. So this was the first one where we just went super in depth. I'm happy to pretty much just at least get some reasonable level of performance out of this, but again, we had to sacrifice so much. So overall, kind of a rough time. But I hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.